Welcome to the channel. Today is the third and final episode in the Flight 191 disaster series. We're going to explore the policies that led to the disaster and why we're waiting on the next Flight 191.
Let's do it.
Let's look at what prompted this series. Until the deadly MAX crashes, the FAA allowed Boeing, like other aircraft manufacturers, to self-certify that their planes met air safety rules, because the FAA doesn't have the staff to do all the certifications itself. A quick computer search and Bing says something different. What they say is the FAA has never allowed companies to police themselves or self-certify their aircraft. So I decided, let's go to the FAA site and see what they say. As everyone knows, when you're dealing with the government, you will quickly get into the weeds. But here's what the FAA says about self-certification. The FAA has never allowed companies to police themselves or self-certify their aircraft. Exactly what Bing said. Of course, that's where they got the information. With too few employees and too much work, how does the FAA maintain that they never allow companies to self-certify or police themselves? Well, they do this through the creation of programs that date back to the 40s and before. So let's take a look at a brief history of these programs. So first of all the documents that I talk about in this video will be linked in the description so you can read them if you'd like. But this document is the establishment of the Organization Designation Authorization Program in 2005 by the FAA. We're going to go down and we're going to look at a brief history to programs that started as early as the 40s. So let's scroll down to background. History of designation programs. So beginning in the 1940s, the FAA's predecessor agency, the Civil Aeronautics Administration, CAA, established programs to appoint designees to perform certain tasks for airman approvals, airworthiness approvals, and certification approvals. Then we move into the 50s as the first program that delegated authority to an organization rather than an individual. So in the 40s, it was designated to individuals. In the 50s, the DOA, which was the Designation Authorization Authority, was intended to take advantage of the experience and knowledge inherent in a manufacturer's organization. So now it extends to the organization, and that's delegated option authorization. In the 60s, we saw the creation of the Designated Alteration Station, DAS program, which was intended to reduce delays in issuing supplemental type certificates by allowing the approved engineering staffs of repair stations to issue STCs. In the 70s, the program was reviewed by the FAA. It delegated organization programs, which then allowed the approval of major alteration data by a delegated organization, but not approval of major repair data. So the review that they had in the 70s led to the creation or the adoption of what's called the Special Federal Aviation Regulation, SFAR 36, in 1978. You have to remember, this was created in 1978. Flight 191 happened in 1979. So this SFAR allowed eligible air carriers, commercial operators, and domestic repair stations to develop and use major repair data, here's the key part, without FAA approval of the data. You recall in the last video that American Airlines created their own ECO with their own procedure for removing the engine and pylon. And they just sent the cover sheet to the FAA. The FAA no longer required for them to send the procedure itself, so all they sent was the cover sheet, and they listed the repair as minor instead of major. Now, because of this, it would not have mattered whether it was major or minor because they no longer needed FAA approval for major repair data. We've gone from FAA certification to individuals and organizations accomplishing these tasks. Also, major alterations and repairs that no longer need FAA approval. How can the FAA maintain that it never allows companies to police themselves or self-certify? I believe this is simply a game of semantics.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yes.
So it comes down to, what is your definition of self-certify and self-policing? For the FAA, it's this. While we refer to these persons and organizations informally as designees under Part 183, they are referred to as representatives of the administrator. As such, when performing a delegated function, designees are legally distinct from and act independent of the organizations that employ them. The authority of these representatives to act comes from the FAA delegation and not a certificate. In essence, the FAA employs thousands of people in companies across the country without paying them, without giving them benefits, and without taking responsibility for when things don't go as they're intended. Now let's go back and look at this one sentence in this document. When acting as a representative of the administrator, these persons or organizations are required to perform in a manner consistent with the policies, guidelines, and directives of the administrator. The last three sentences are the linchpin the FAA uses to justify the statement, and I quote, "The FAA has never allowed companies to police themselves or self-certify," end quote. The FAA does levy fines against these companies, but they never actually take responsibility for the problems that their policies have created. Now, can anyone foresee that a company that has a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders might cut some corners while trying to stay just within compliance? Let's fast forward to 1992, where an SFAR 36 working group met to draft amendments to the SFAR. And here is one of the amendments that they drafted. Contrary provisions of 121.379B and 135.437B of this chapter notwithstanding, the holder of an aircraft air carrier certificate or operating certificate that operates large aircraft and that has been issued operations specifications for operations required to be conducted in accordance with 14 CFR Part 12, 1 or 135 may perform a major repair on a product as described in subsection 121.379 or 135.437 using technical data that have not been approved by the administrator. Not been approved by the administrator is key here. And approve that product for return to service. Now let's take a look at a couple of those regulations that were just called out in those amendments. 135.437. You can see, however, in the case of a major repair or alteration, the work must have been done in accordance with the technical data approved by the administrator. Same thing here, 121.379. In case of a major repair or major alteration, the work must have been done in accordance with the technical data approved by the administrator. We're going to look at what approval by the administrator means in a little bit. But these amendments were sent for approval and subsequently published in the Federal Register after their approval. SFAR 36, 1978 allowed for the use of major repair data without FAA approval. SFAR 36, 1992 amendment is used to reinforce that deviation from the regulations. The 1978 SFAR was extended every 5 years until 2004. In 2005, the ODA program was established in response to a steadily increasing workload by expanding the scope of authorized functions of FAA organizational designees and by expanding eligibility for organizational designees. Now, one way they did this was the program expands eligibility by eliminating the requirement that an organization holds some type of FAA certificate before it would qualify for a designation authorization. Currently, delegations are limited to such organizations as manufacturers, air carriers, commercial operators, and repair stations. This rule formalizes the delegation of functions to any qualified organization. Accordingly, an organization with demonstrated competence, integrity, and expertise in aircraft certification functions is eligible to apply for an ODA. So you no longer need to hold an FAA certificate prior to applying to become an ODA holder. Now you just have to have a demonstrated competence, integrity, and expertise in aircraft certification. Next, let's look at the types of ODA certificates. There are 7 types. We're only going to look at 4 of them because we're mainly looking at Boeing and American Airlines, and Boeing holds 4 types and American holds 2 of those types. So let's look at the types of certificates we're talking about. The MRA ODA holders of an MRA may approve data for major repairs and alterations, issue airworthiness certificates and approvals, and perform aging aircraft inspections and records reviews. Then you have the STC ODA. Those holders may develop and issue supplemental type certificates and related airworthiness certificates. Then you have the TC ODA. Type certificate ODA holders may manage and make findings for type certificate programs. Production certificate may issue airworthiness certificates and approvals, determine conformity, perform evaluation leading to amendment of its production limitation records, and approve minor changes to its quality control manual. Next, I want to look at how the FAA defines some of these terms that we've been using. When I use the term administration, I'm talking about the Federal Aviation Administration. We're going to look at some definitions here in 14 CFR Part 1 and see how the FAA defines some of these terms. So administrator means the Federal Aviation Administrator or any person to whom he has delegated his authority in the matter concerned. Approved, unless used with reference to another person, means approved by the FAA or any person to whom the FAA has delegated its authority in the matter concerned. So anytime in these regulations where you see the term approved by administrator, that doesn't mean necessarily that it was approved by the FAA. It could have been approved by someone that the FAA has delegated that authority to, such as the ODA holders that we're talking about. When we look at major repairs and alterations, I only want to concern ourselves with this one portion here, and that is not done according to accepted practices or cannot be done by elementary operations. Accepted practices would be things that would be found in the maintenance manual. Those are all accepted practices. If one can't use accepted practices, then they would need to seek approval. Before, that meant going to the FAA. But now the FAA has delegated that authority to others, such as ODA holders, which more than likely is the entity that would need to seek approval.
Right.
Now we're going to jump to 2013. We're going to look at this order, 8100.15B. We're going to look at basically what it establishes, and we're going to look at a couple of definitions. So this order establishes the procedures, guidance, and limitations of authority that the Federal Aviation Administration grants to an organization under the Organization Designation Authorization Program. So it's just setting up the procedures and guidance for these ODAs to follow. Now let's look at a couple of definitions. ODA administrators, the focal points for the ODA holder who is responsible for managing the ODA unit's activities and communicating with the OMT. We'll see what the OMT is in a second. An ODA holder may have a separate ODA administrator for each ODA type. So administrators in this is not FAA administrators. This is ODA administrators. So within the company, there's an ODA holder, which an ODA holder is the organization that obtained the ODA letter of designation. Within that holder designation, there is an administrator. And there could be an administrator for each type of designation. So as you recall, Boeing had 4 types and American had 2. So they could have an administrator for each type of those certificates. Then we have an ODA unit, an identifiable unit of 2 or more individuals within an organization that performs the delegated functions on behalf of the FAA. So to have an ODA holder, you have to have 2 people to be a unit. So 2 or more individuals. Now let's go to what the OMT is. The Organizational Management Team. The OMT consists of those aviation safety engineers, flight test pilots, and aviation safety inspectors needed to oversee and organize and its certification activity. An organization that holds one of these certificates is comprised of a team which has an administrator and unit members. all are supposed to be working for the FAA, following the FAA's guidelines. Now, next, we're going to go to 2018, and we're going to look at an advisory circle that was issued, and it's not mandatory or a regulation, but it does have a few items that I want to look at. First, let's remind ourselves what an advisory circular is. The advisory circular system provides a single, uniform, agency-wide system that the Federal Aviation Administration uses to deliver advisory material to FAA customers, industry, the aviation community, and the public. Now we're going to go to the advisory circular itself, which is number 43210A, which was issued in May of 2018. And I've pulled out some excerpts from the circular to highlight here. So 1.5 regulatory basis. Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations and Part 43, subsection 43.7 specifies persons authorized to approve an aircraft or aircraft component for return to service after maintenance, preventative maintenance, rebuilding, or alteration. For major repairs or major alterations, the work must be done in accordance with technical data approved by the administrator. 1.6 Repair and alteration classification. You must perform major repairs and major alterations using technical data approved by the administrator. 1.7 Responsibility for obtaining data. It is the responsibility of the person intending on performing the major repair, major alteration to obtain, organize, and submit data to the approving authority for review and approval. So what is approved data, according to this advisory circular? Approved data is data approved by the FAA. The term approved is based on subsection 1.1, which states, approved unless used with reference to another person, means approved by the FAA or any person to whom the FAA has delegated its authority in the manner concerned. And you recall, the FAA delegates its authority to ODA holders. ODA holders are organizations within the companies that are actually seeking approval. So ODA data approval, you may employ an ODA holder to provide approved technical data to support a major repair, major alteration. If the applicant employs a DER or ODA to provide approved technical data to support a major repair or major alteration, then the applicant is responsible for ensuring the DER or ODA is authorized to approve such technical data as applicable to the repair or alteration. If the data as approved addresses the entire repair or alteration and all of the requirements of Part 21 and 43 are met, there is no requirement for any further approval of the ASI if the repair or alteration data is approved solely by the DER, ODA, or DAR, but necessitates maintenance instructions. The maintenance instructions should be prepared by the applicant and recorded in Block 8 of FAA Form 337. This advisory circular reinforces the idea that major alterations and repairs need only be approved by a delegated authority and not the FAA. Recall, American Airlines developed its own maintenance procedure that led to the disaster of Flight 191. Now, next, we're going to look at how the FAA used an order to codify this practice. Here is Order 8300.16A Change 1, and it was issued by the FAA in December of 2018. Now, for ease of illustration, I have pulled out these three sections just so I can go over them quickly without having to go through the 57-page document. So the first thing I wanted to see was Chapter 1, 5B definitions. Now, basically, a major alteration requires the use of FAA-approved technical data. And they acknowledge here in this definition, the use of the terms major and minor are sometimes inappropriately applied or misunderstood. A major change in design type design can be approved only by an ACO or an ODA holder with supplemental type certificate or type certificate authorization. So they are defining that ODA holders with these types of certificates can approve major alterations. Chapter 2, 1G, approved technical data. Major alterations and major repairs that have all the necessary DER and ODA approved technical data should not require further approval. No need to come to the FAA. You have ODA authorization. It's good to go. Chapter 3, field approve process, and data approval. Data approval authority, one of the means used by the FAA to approve technical data that is used to accomplish a major repair or major alteration, is through an authorized ASI or, as we're talking about here, other delegated authority. Technical data, when so approved, becomes data approved by the FAA. It's right there. They've codified this now. They've put it out there, and they've made it regulations where an ODA has the authority given to it by the FAA to approve major repair and alterations. In 2005, the FAA established the ODA program. Finally, in 2019, the FAA established the ODA office. Now, why was it established and what's its purpose? The office was established because it was required by the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 and is now part of the FAA's ODA program. So what is the purpose of the office? What does it do? The ODA office oversees and ensures consistency of the FAA's oversight program for companies that issue certificates and conduct certain inspections on behalf of the agency. Did they come to the realization that maybe there was a problem with oversight and consistency with the rules and regulations put forth by the FAA? I don't know. Next, let's look at this notice, 8100.17. Now, the title says everything, and it's the first reference I've seen to this. We're going to look at its purpose, and we're going to look at its audience. So, title, subject, organization, designation, authorization, holder, interference with ODA unit members, and communication between UMs and the FAA. Is there a problem with communication between the unit members of the FAA holder and the FAA? Apparently. Otherwise, they wouldn't have this. So the purpose of this notice supplements Federal Aviation Administration Order 8100.15B, which we've already looked at, a couple of sections of it, organization, designation, authorization procedures, by providing instructions and procedures intended to eliminate or minimize ODA holder interference with UMs performing their authorized functions and to ensure free communication between UMs and the FAA. Who's the intended audience here? The audience for this notice includes ODA applicants, ODA holders, including their unit members, and the FAA offices that evaluate, appoint, and manage ODA holders. My question is, why would they use the term minimize? Wouldn't the goal be to eliminate? They don't want to just minimize any interference. They want to eliminate the interference. Now, next, we're going to look at Notice 8100.18, which is going to be, it is an extension of this one, extend it for a year, and it's going to be incorporated into the next 8100.15B revision, which would be 8100.15C, I assume. So let's look at this notice in 8100.18. And like I said, this updated notice extends the ongoing interference reporting and communication instructions and procedures in Notice 8100.17. So I said the 8100.17 was the first interference I saw where they were addressing interference. Actually, in 2020, the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act, Public Law 116-260, added several provisions specific to the FAA's oversight of ODA holders to ensure that ODA unit members can conduct delegated functions without interference by their employer. Now, this is going to show what they have procedures, what they can do about it. In September 22, the FAA issued notice in 8100.17 to provide instructions and procedures to eliminate or minimize ODA holder interference with UMs. Like I said, minimize. Why are you minimizing it? Why is the goal to eliminate? Scroll down and we'll see the ODA holder's procedure manual must include procedures that identify an ODA administrator responsible for the investigation of reports of alleged interference with UMs and describe how ODA holder personnel will conduct investigations. So if I'm a unit member and I have a problem, I'm going to go to my ODA administrator and try to fill out a report. So who do you think in the company is trying to interfere with the unit members from communicating with the FAA? It seems to me like this is just a matter of the fox guarding the henhouse.
I'm a fox, and so I'm always on the lookout for one of these hen houses. Now, this is Gus. He's a watchdog, and his main job is to keep me away from these hens. Hey, Gus.
Hey, Frankie!
Gus, what would you think if I took your job and I was in charge of guarding this hen house?
That would be a horrible idea, because you would totally eat all these chickens.
But let's move on. So FAA OMT Oversight. Review reports of investigation of alleged interference. Final investigation reports of alleged interference from the ODA holder must be reviewed by the OMT. And we saw what the OMT was before. It's organizational management team that's a team inside the FAA. So they're supposed to review the final reports. But if the reports are never given to them, how can they review them? Now, the other thing is there's supposed to be an annual oversight of the OMT. And with this annual oversight, there's one good thing that can come of this, I guess, is they're supposed to include a review of the results of the annual solicitation of feedback from UMs. So they give them a form or a something where they have to fill out so they can give them feedback as to how the ODA program is working for them, and if they've had any problems with it. So they're supposed to look at that annually and see if there's any problems.
If Lieutenant Kendrick gave an order that Santiago wasn't to be touched, then why did he have to be transferred?
If the ODA is acting as a representative of the administration and not the company that employs them, then why do you need an order dealing with interference with a unit member trying to communicate with the FAA? It's because they know the system that they have put in place is not addressing the problems that are occurring, and they're allowing the companies they've given this delegated authority to act as gatekeepers of the information that needs to be passed on from the unit members to the FAA. We followed the FAA's delegation of its authority from 1978 to 2023 and is currently ongoing. Are they going to finally start holding these companies responsible or liable? The FAA certainly holds no liability, even though they're the ones abdicating their authority. Now, currently we have aircraft with wheels falling off, door plugs falling off, panels falling off, trailing edge wedges on slats disintegrating, all kinds of issues. It looks like Boeing may be held criminally responsible for continuing to use policies and procedures that led to the fatal incidents of the 737 MAX a few years ago. But what does that look like? Does it look like, is it fines? Is it jail time? Is it, who's responsible? Who are they going to hold responsible? Is it going to be the CEO, the employees? Is this going to happen to the CEO?
Dick, you're fired!
No, I think not. I think he's going to get a golden parachute and go away, and they're going to hire somebody else to take his place. So those are my thoughts based on the research I've done. I'd like to know what you think. So if you have any comments, please leave them below, and make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And thanks for watching. Peace out.